Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. And to BMS members and the World Storytelling Cafe and all our followers on the Facebook page. And I promise you, we will eventually meet in real life. But for the moment, this is yet another Zoom call. We were hoping that we would be able to have more physical meetings, but with people still being a little bit nervous of meeting up, it seemed sensible at the moment to have another Zoom call. And we'll be talking, we're very lucky to have the author James van Leyden talking to us about his second book, Last Boat from Tangier, which because I'm reading it on Kindle, I'm 84% into it, and it's a fantastic book. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to hand over to Mike Wood, our relatively new chairman, who wants to say a few words. Mike.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I'd like to start by welcoming one or two new faces, in particular Trevor Peel, I think there, from the National Liberal Club, who's got exciting plans to travel to Morocco in a couple of years' time. And before we hear from James, I'd like to continue the pattern that we've established of highlighting one of the charities that the BMS supports. We're very proud of our charity work, which has been sustained over several decades, as you know. And tonight we're delighted to welcome Yannick Etienne, who is the treasurer of the Association Amnagor. Good evening to you, Yannick. Now, two of our trustees, Hans Patel and Benedict Clarkson, have visited the association in recent years. Hans in 2016 and Benedict in 2019, I think. But we also had a really nice profile, which Ella put on our Facebook and social media relatively recently. So if you have time to explore a little bit more, that's a great place to go. But if I can hand over to Yannick, welcome. And if you could just give us a word or two on the association and the work you're doing, we'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me tonight. You'll notice I have a bit of a weird accent because I'm Swiss myself. My wife is from Belfast. That's where I am right now, just outside Belfast. But I've lived in Morocco for about 13 years. In the south of Morocco, always in the Sousse area. For those who know Ouarzazate, that's where we are right now. So yeah, Amnougar. Amnougar is, it means the place of the meeting in Tachelheit, in Tamazirt. So that's what we want for that place. So it was started in 2000 and early 2000s. I'll keep it short, but I still like the story. There was a retired Swiss man who liked hiking the hills around Ouarzazate, and he was on a hike and he met a Franciscan nun there in the outskirts of Ouarzazate, and she was having that dream of starting a place for young disabled people, a place where they could learn learn some skills in order to get better integrated into the larger society. Unfortunately, disabled people still have very little opportunities at least in the south of Morocco. I can't speak for other places, but where we are, opportunities are very limited. So she wanted to change that. They wanted to change that together. And they've started welcoming young disabled people. Most of them, had very little education. They would drop out of school. Most of them would not even go to school. Some of them would go, second, third grade, and then they would drop out. So they started welcoming these young disabled people and taught them social skills. And then also in terms of work abilities, they started teaching farming. So they started just with farming, but now 20 years later, people can learn farming, jewelry making, they do some carpentry as well and some sewing. So there's currently 4 areas where people can learn a new job. So it's a 2 years process. Currently, because of COVID restrictions, we can't be at full capacity, but normally we can welcome up to 37, 40 young adults like that. It's there's boarding facilities, of course, because most of them come from far away, so they can live there. It's also good to have that sense of community, you know, where they can just be around people, where often they are just isolated in a room, you know, on their own. So they come for 2 years, and after 2 years, they get a certificate, certifying, you know, that they've followed the courses, and many of them go on then, you know, starting their little small business. We give them a certificate and a kit, a starting kit, so they could start, you know, a little micro business if you want. So the ones finishing farming will get maybe 2 goats or a couple of rabbits. The ones sewing, you know, will get a sewing machine and some basic material, and then they can start their little micro business back in their villages. And I won't lie. I won't tell you that it always works. You know, some of them, because of the disability, you know, and everything, find it hard then, you know, to fly with their own wings. But there are wonderful stories where you see some of these young people starting repairing the clothes, you know, of the whole neighborhood, and selling clothes, and just being integrated in ways that they could never have dreamt of. So that's what we do.
Thank you so much, Yannick. That's absolutely wonderful. Richard, could I hand back to you for the sort of principal event? Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, something else we're keen to publicise is the Literary Festival in Marrakesh, which is the 26th to the 28th of November. And James is going to be one of about 18 authors, and we've got children's authors, novelists, non-fiction, cookery writers and chefs. So there's going to be talks, a gala dinner, workshops, storytelling events. We're teaming up with Mike's World Storytelling Cafe and the Cafe Clock, and it's a sort of multi-organizational thing. There's the British Business Association are doing most of the organizing, but we're heavily involved in as well, and the British Council. So it should be a fantastic thing. We really urge everyone, especially if you've missed out, as I'm sure you have, on a lot of travel over the last 18 months or so, to book your flights to Marrakesh, and it promises to be a great event. So anyway, James van Leyden used to work as a copywriter and was also a travel writer before he became a novelist. And he first went to Morocco in 1985 and now has a house in Walidia. Is that how I pronounce it? Walidia?
Indeed.
And his first book, A Death in the Medina, came out in 2019. And his second book, which he'll be talking about tonight, is called Last Boat from Tangier. And I can honestly say it's a fantastic read. It's a real page turner, and it's beautifully researched. It's all set in Tangier, so the details are spot on. It's very vivid, and it really brings the city and its surrounding landscape and the Tangier Med and everything to life. So we'll start. I presume we're recording already. You. Great. So James, first of all, what was your sort of first experiences of Morocco? What how did you first come across it?
Well, thank you, Richard, first of all, for inviting me, and welcome everybody, and nice to be here. I was thinking about this earlier today, and actually the story really begins at a bring and buy sale in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire, because it was there that the father of my then girlfriend, this is 1984, bought a copy of The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles, which he read, enjoyed, and passed on to his daughter, my girlfriend, who also read and loved it, and she in turn passed it on to me. And we decided there and then to go to Morocco to meet Paul Bowles. That was our objective, and that's what we did in 1985. We flew to Tangier. We found it very hard to find him, but we called in at a very well-known bookshop, which I'm sure many of you know about. It's been an institution in Tangier for decades, the Librairie des Colonnes. And they said, leave a note and we'll make sure it gets to him. So we did that. We then disappeared to Fez for 5 days. And on return, I was amazed and thrilled to find a note from him inviting us to tea in exactly 20 minutes from the time we received the note. So we rushed up the hill to his apartment, a flat, and yeah, spent the evening with him, and it was magical. The whole trip was magical. Obviously, that was the highlight, but that was my introduction to the Maghreb, to North Africa, and yeah, it was. And it continues to be a source of endless fascination.
Because I interviewed the manageress at the time of the Librairie des Colonnes, and she said that Paul Bowles, he was basically quite tight with money, and he didn't have a telephone, and it was before mobile phones. So she would relay messages between people like yourself or journalists or admirers who would leave their names and and she would pass it on, and they were, some boy would act as a sort of courier. So I'm glad to see that system worked, because it sounds quite precarious.
Yes, I assumed it was more because of there was a gatekeeper to the inner sanctum, and I still think the only reason we gained an audience was because my girlfriend was called Jane, as was his wife. But anyway, yes, it was a great system.
Great story. So what made you make that transition to be a fiction writer?
Well, again, I'm a great believer in serendipity, and I'd come back to Morocco and been lucky enough to find a house which I converted with my wife in Walidia, and I'd been coming and going every year, about 5 times a year, to our house in Walidia, usually via Marrakesh, sometimes via Tangier. And there was something that interested me greatly about the possibilities that Morocco offered to writers. And I wasn't a writer, I had no qualifications really, but the sort of contrast between the surface and the underneath, and the, if you like, the sun and the dust and the heat and all that side of Morocco, and the Western facing aspect of Morocco contrasted with the Islamic African side, I thought created tension, exemplified particularly in Tangier, but also in Marrakesh. And I thought, if I were a crime writer, I would write a crime story in Morocco, because nobody had done it, and I thought it was ripe for exploration. And so that's what I did. I on those endless trips to Marrakesh, I would write without any real hope of being published, but I was lucky enough to find an agent, and they in turn found a publisher. And yeah, it saw the light of day, as you said, 2 years ago. And then I turned my attention to Tangier, because I may be preempting your questions a bit, but I was just going to say, although Marrakesh is a city I love and know extremely well, I always keep going back to Tangier, because it has that north-facing, south-facing dichotomy of Morocco, which is very, very interesting indeed. And it's still there. It still, causes tensions. It still causes, ripples geopolitically. But it's fascinating to explore. I wasn't actually interested in crime fiction. That's the other confession I have to make. I'm not actually a reader particularly of that genre, but I thought I'll give it a go, and here I am being interviewed by yourself.
Did you find that the writing came easily, or because I mean, myself, I find it all a sort of struggle with my inner demons and things, and I had writer's block and stuff. But did you, because you had written travel articles before, so was it a big adjustment to write the more long form thing, and did you find it difficult?
I found it extremely difficult, and I still do. I find writing is incredibly tiring, taxing, and you have to wrestle with those demons, as you say, endless self-criticism. No, I don't enjoy it. I enjoy editing, but the process is like getting blood out of a stone, and I wish I could say I find it a breeze, but I don't. It's hard work, it's hard graft, and no writing of advertising or travel writing, I mean, that is, you can knock that off without a second thought. But writing, you live with it, as you know, you live with it for years, if often, certainly months, and you're always thinking about it. So it's a presence, a constant presence. And I also really wanted to do justice to Morocco, because I think everybody in this Zoom call is kind of aware of the way Islam, the Arab world, the Maghreb is treated in fiction, and I kind of felt, you know, I wanted to do justice to it, not to use the same old tropes, but nor to make it over, benevolent seeming. I wanted to somehow try and capture that in you know, I don't want to compare myself with Paul Bowles, but I think The Sheltering Sky did capture a very interesting period and a very interesting angle on the Western Islamic sort of meeting of, or non-meeting of minds. And that's a little bit of what I try to emulate, if you like, in my books, with obviously a murder and a few twists along the way. But yes, that's what I'm after.
We won't give away the plot, but you touched on this a bit, but what is it about Tangier that makes such a good backdrop for a novel? I mean, I've noticed in recent years some films have been, or certainly scenes have been shot in Tangier, and it's very photogenic. But, you know, can you explore that a bit more, why it's so appealing for a writer?
Sure. I think it's always been appealing for writers. As we know, I mean, in the 40s and 50s, we've had Genet, we've had Burroughs, we've had a lot of Western writers have been attracted to Tangier. For me personally, it's the fact that you can stand in the Medina of Tangier and you can see Europe, you can see another continent. If you look to your left, you can see the Atlantic Ocean, to your right is the Mediterranean, and behind you, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is good. We just to say, I forgot to mention, we've got some of James's lovely photos of Tangier, and we're going to put them up from time to time. So that wasn't a glitch. Please carry on.
Yes. So that's it's the physical situation, if you like, of Tangier that is so interesting, and latterly. So it's always attracted exiles, it's always attracted Western writers and artists. Latterly, it has also started to attract migrants, because since Libya became, as it were, out of bounds or dangerous, one of the favoured south-north routes now is through Mali and Morocco, and Tangier is usually the destination point. So you've already had the sort of Western expat contingent and the Riffian Berber element of Tangier, and the modern Moroccan element, obviously. And now you've got a sizable transient community of migrants who are essentially en route to the promised land. That's how they would see it. And that interested me too. So yes, it's a scenic city. And yes, it's got many landmarks, which are quite, you know, I find impossibly romantic, and we'll see some of them in the photos. But it's got a very unique atmosphere. It's got a melancholy feel, and it's got a very otherworldly feel, which is down to the fact that it's on the edge of two vast watery masses on the northwestern tip of Africa, facing Europe, you know, and that is, as you probably recognize, that's the Cap Spartel lighthouse just outside Tangier, about 8 miles outside, which I use as a location in the book. And it's just down from there that you can actually see a sign on the road with one sign pointing to the Mediterranean and the other to the Atlantic, where the sea and the ocean meet. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell the answer. Now was an interesting time in the life of Tangier, partly because of the migrants and partly because it's modernizing, as all Morocco is, incredibly rapidly. Even while I was writing the book, the changes were, you know, I found it hard to keep pace. For instance, the fishing port, which we saw a glimpse of in the first photo, relocated. It's now to the left of where it used to be, and it's much more modern, and the marina is being built as we speak, and that's heralding a bright new future. And of course, the shipping has moved east to Tanger Med, and that's had a big impact on, here we are, that's the old fishing port. I took that 3 years ago, but it's no longer in that place. It's now near the mosque by the ferry embarkation point for Tarifa. So a very fast changing city.
I mean, your book is wonderful because I appreciate it even more because of COVID, that it's a piece of armchair traveling. So I like crime fiction, but even if you're not a big crime aficionado, it's a wonderful, it really transports you to Tangier and Morocco. So if any of you guys watching this want to experience a bit of Tangier, it's a wonderful way to do it, as well as to look at these great photos. And as I said, the book's very detailed in its research, and you obviously knew a lot about the port and the container ships and everything. So can you explain? I'd assumed that sort of non-fiction writers put more effort, more legwork into the research than a novelist. I'd always assumed that novelists just sort of sit there and things come out of their head. But it looks like you've done a lot of groundwork here. Can you just explain how you researched the book?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the compliment, Richard. And I'm sure you researched your book extensively. But to be fair, I think you probably put in more legwork, because a lot of what I do, I can find out on the internet. I wasn't interviewing people, and the biggest hurdle for me is, and always has been, gaining access to the workings of the Sûreté, because it's very hard. You will remember as a journalist, I'm sure, that you're often treated with great suspicion if you say you want to spend a day with the police force. They think you're going to do a massive expose. So I've always found that part of the research, I've had to rely on my own, internet trawling, if you like. The other part for this book that was tricky was understanding containerization and the workings of Tanger Med, which is an extremely high security zone. The reason it's become the premier shipping port in Africa, and it's on its way to becoming one of the top 20 in the world, is because they take security extremely seriously. And I don't just mean migrants, I'm talking also about, the usual drugs, arms. So again, getting access, other than looking from the passenger terminal and wondering what goes on, is hard, because I approached the terminal operator, I approached the company itself that is responsible for the the Tangier Med Port Authority. They were very sympathetic, but they said, no, I'm sorry, it's a security problem. And in the end, I only managed to solve it by actually getting onto a container ship from Antwerp to Tangier, getting off at Tangier after spending a fascinating 10 days at sea. And that time between exiting the ship and coming out of the port, I tell you what, my eyes were, they were trying to take in everything I could see, so much visual information. And of course, I talked to people who are on the whole very friendly. It's just that taking photographs and anything that reeks of, secret ways of smuggling, they're very, very suspicious of. So yeah, it is a problem in Morocco, as it is everywhere, gaining access. On the whole, Moroccans are very welcoming, but not when it's something to do with the king, the police, or any security kind of implication. If there's any security implication, then they're cagey, and it's a lot harder, certainly.
And sorry, we'll take Ali, unless there's something. I was going to suggest that we open it up for questions at the end. Unless, Ali, do you want to ask a question now? You're muted.
Yes, if I may. I was wondering, actually, why did you call your book The Last Boat from Tangiers? And also, why did you choose Walidia? Are you a fan of oysters?
Two very good questions. Two very good questions. Thank you, Ali. Yes, I'll answer the second one first. Walidia, again, was pure luck. I was in Essaouira in 1999. The travel agent at the time, because there used to be travel agents who organized my trips to Morocco then, said to me, if you're going to Essaouira, why don't you fly in via Marrakesh, fly out through Casablanca, and on your way up the coast from Essaouira, we know a lovely place in a village called Walidia, the Hippo Camp. You can stay in the hotel for 2 nights. You'll love it. And I said, fine, book me in. I arrived there on, I think it was the week before Easter. I remember that because the Sunday was Palm Sunday. I arrived on the Friday in Walidia, not having any preconceptions because I was very full of Essaouira and keen to explore this magical city. And I was totally bowled over without even trying the oysters. It's one of those things that always happens to me in Morocco, which is why I love it so much. I was sitting on the beach thinking, how can I come back here and do a bit of writing? Maybe I should go about looking for places to rent. And I met a guy and he said to me, oh, you want to find somewhere to rent? Well, I'll show you some places. So we took a look around at some of the places in Walidia, and every time we looked, my curiosity and my delight was growing because I could see, this, again, another contrast between the ocean and the lagoon, this beautiful calm of the serenity of the lagoon contrasting with the wild Atlantic. And then he suddenly turned around and said, hey, why don't you buy somewhere? And I thought, hang on, I didn't know, steady, I'm only passing through. I certainly have no intention of buying anywhere. And he said, well, let's go and have a look. There's a woman selling a house up on the hill. I thought, okay. To humor him more than anything, I agreed to be taken along. And long story short, my wife and I ended up buying that house. What can I say? It was just pure chance. And I love Walidia more after 20 years than ever. I go there as often as I can. My children basically spent all their childhood there when they were growing up in their holidays. We've had endless friends, discover Morocco via Walidia. It's a magical place, as indeed many places in Morocco are. Your first question, why did I call it Last Boat from Tangier? Well, it's odd because the original title was night boat from Tangier. And lo and behold, the year that I was writing it, a book came out you may have heard of called Night Boat to Tangier. A very good book, incidentally. And I was so, I mean, what are the chances? But anyway, I discussed it with my publisher, and I wanted to keep the word Tangier in the title. I wanted to keep the word boat in the title. It ended up being, rather than Night Boat from Tangier, it ended up being Last Boat from Tangier. And the last because, well, you'll have to read the book. It's significant. Well, that's all I'll say. I wonder if I might take the liberty of suggesting we play a very short video that explains the premise of the book.
Yes, I completely forgot to mention that. So you'll use racking it up now.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So yes, I'm glad you reminded me of that, James, because I meant to introduce that at the beginning. And just going back to how on earth did you get onto a cargo boat from Antwerp, and what was it like? It sounds a sort of Michael Palin adventure.
Yes, well, yes, indeed. It was surprisingly easy, Richard, because in this day and age, you can do anything. And there are actually websites which specialize in matching would-be passengers with cargo boats. If you want to go to Vladivostok in 225 days, you can do it. They'll find you a boat, they'll match you up. A lot of the big container companies, because we sometimes forget, containerization has changed our world massively, but we don't really see that part of it. We see, I don't know, the glass that we hold when it arrives in the supermarket where we buy it from, or the computer mouse that we order online, but they all come in big metal boxes. And I was fascinated by how capitalism is totally dependent on containerization. And Tangier Med has become very pivotal to this trade because it's, sorry, I'm slightly digressing, but it's become pivotal to the trade because it's on what they call the line of zero deviation. That means that a container ship from the Far East, which is where most of the trade tends to originate, going west towards, say, the Atlantic seaboard of the United States of America or Northern Europe, coming through the Suez Canal, will then exit through the Strait of Gibraltar, and it can dock at Tangier Med without deviating from its route. And time is money in the container world. So and that's why I saw at Tangier Med, they could strip a container ship of often 12 to 15,000 20-ton containers in 3.5 hours and load it with the same number of containers, and it went on its way. It's incredibly fast turnaround. So how to find out about this? Well, as I say, I booked a passage, and they just said, turn up at the docks in Antwerp. I mean, it felt very old sort of school in a way, you know, because people don't tend to go to docks anymore. We don't tend to visit that part of, if you like, the grubby end of shipping, like in our forefathers' days. But, and the other interesting aspect was that the captain of my ship, which belonged to a French shipping company, Russian captain, Filipino crew, and me. I mean, talk about globalization. Yeah, very interesting. They made me very welcome. I had my own cabin. It was extremely comfortable. The food was disappointing, especially for a French shipping company. but I found it extremely relaxing, as well as interesting. Relaxing because you're often at sea for days without any internet access. And you're often out of sight of land. Even if you go round the Bay of Biscay to Le Havre, we docked at Le Havre, but I remember this was exactly 2 years ago, and it was a very hot summer, and Le Havre was congested, and we had to wait outside. We had to wait for 2 days outside. So the very nice Russian captain suggested to me I go fishing, and he gave me a line and some hooks, and he just pointed to the back of this enormous, we're talking 500-foot vessel. He pointed to a place on the very back, and he said, you know, just dangle the line overboard, and within minutes I'd caught about 15 mackerel, which the cook then proceeded to cook for me and the rest of the crew, much to my delight. It was an adventure, Richard, to be honest. It was an adventure. I wasn't expecting it to be so, but spending time at sea really is quite different. And it was also a very different way of arriving in Morocco. I've arrived by car and I've arrived by plane. I've never arrived by boat. And yeah, it's very different because, again, entering the Mediterranean by the Straits of Gibraltar it's a heart-stopping moment. It is absolutely magical. You can see Europe on your left, you can see Africa looming up on your right, you see the Cap Spartel lighthouse, and then you're in the strait, and you can't help thinking of the huge amount of traffic that's gone through that strait and continues to go through that strait. 20,000 of these huge container ships a year, not to mention lots of ferries. It's awe-inspiring. It's absolutely awe-inspiring. And an interesting aspect of coming by sea, which I hadn't appreciated, because I remember when I come by plane, I always crane my neck and I look down on the strait. Sometimes you can see flocks of geese flying across because it's a very big, obviously, migration route for birds. But the other thing that you can see, which you only really notice when you're on a boat, is that the waters of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, they actually form a line where they meet, because the waters of the Mediterranean are saltier than the waters of the Atlantic. And this causes one lot of water to go under the other lot, and the point where they meet, there's an actual line in the water. And it's quite incredible to see that meeting of two masses of water in such a stark way.
So can you see that line? Is it visible?
You can. I mean, maybe I was lucky, maybe the water was particularly calm, but it was very, very clear, yes. Yeah, it was clear between slightly dark.
You mention it in the book because the detective is trying to work out if a body had been washed ashore, which direction it would drift in. So you mentioned those different layers of water. But just to go back to the container ship, how long were you on it for? And was it not boring sometimes just staring at containers and smelling diesel?
Well, the answer is no, because I wasn't staring at containers. I was staring at the horizon. I was staring at the Atlantic Ocean. And the stars at night. And I defy you to find a more relaxing and serene vista. And as for the smell, no, there were, cocooned in my cabin, I could have diesel if I wanted. They let me roam the ship at will, which was incredible because I was used to the security of, ports in Morocco. Yes, I certainly didn't ever feel bored. If anything, I spent 12 days. You asked me how long I spent. I spent 12 days. If anything, I would have gladly spent another 12 days. I really was sad it ended. And I've made a mental note to go on a much longer trip. And it's not just for purposes of discovery, it's because it's so rare to get that time nowadays in our busy lives where you really feel cut off. And I felt cut off in a nice way, surrounded by sea. I mean, I felt very, very relaxed indeed. Slept brilliantly. The window was open. I just had the breeze blowing straight off the sea and just ploughing ahead. I could see right over the containers to the front of the boat, and other boats, just like lights, like constellations in the distance. Sublime. I mean, it really appealed to the kind of boy in me. So yeah, I would like to do it again.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think I'd like to try that. And just going back to the book and how you actually wrote it then, do you have a sort of writing routine or a method? I mean, how do you work on your books? Or do you think of the plot first, or do you develop the characters, or how do you go about writing?
What I try to do, and I don't know whether I'm successful, if I have a place in mind, so it was Marrakesh, then it was then it was Tangier. Now I'm working on a book about Fez. Is I always pick a few key locations in the city which resonate with me. They may not resonate with other people, but certainly resonate with me. And I try to link them by some kind of narrative. I kind of try and think of a story that, joins various dots, not just locations in the city, but moments in Moroccan national life, or geopolitical phenomena, for instance, the arrival of sub-Saharan migrants, or in the case of Marrakesh, the extreme heat. It's set in an extremely hot August, which I experienced in 2011 when Ramadan fell in the month of August. And I thought it'd be interesting to portray a character who had to withgo the rigors of fasting, which all Moroccos gladly undergo, I hasten to add. But we as Westerners or non-Muslims often don't appreciate quite what a regime it involves. And so have the character and the book start the 1st of August, the hottest Ramadan in living memory, and then pile on the pressure, one thing after another, so that the character is really suffering, not suffering, but challenged. And because I was interested again in crime books, in my limited experience, tend to take place largely at night. They're kind of, I associate them with the Nordic noir, with cold, with wet. I thought, why not have it in absolutely fierce, unimaginable heat, and at a time of year when actually it's low season in Marrakesh, because it's so darn hot and there aren't that many foreigners in the city. And the few that there are there may have some particular narratives. They may have some secret, may have some reason for being there. And see how I could combine the narratives of the young policeman. He's a young, devout, a good young policeman with slightly more morally compromised Western expatriates and visitors, and just see what happens when those worlds collided. That's it in a nutshell. But I mean, that's my method, I suppose.
Again, I don't want, for people that want to read the book, we don't want to give too much away, but with the Tangier book, what were the sort of some of the main locations that you mapped out first, that you thought, I want to include these?
Okay, so there was the Cap Spartel Lighthouse, which we just saw. That was, if you like, the westernmost extremity. The easternmost was Ceuta. It's not strictly Tangier, but I wonder if we could just see, there's a slide which has got...
Can we have a few more slides?
Yeah, there's one which has a map of the Strait of Gibraltar. I'm sure people are familiar with the geography, but it may be helpful if we there it is. Yeah, so that was my easternmost point. Ceuta is another place that absolutely fascinates me because it's an anomaly, and it faces another anomaly, which is Gibraltar. And, you know, history has somehow given us these two outposts of Spain and Great Britain in the oddest places facing each other across the Strait of Gibraltar. So the other thing that's interesting about Ceuta is that it's got a big wall, and I've got a photograph coming up in the slides of this wall, which is, until you see it, it's quite hard to grasp how fortified it is. It's basically the southern perimeter of Europe. It's Fortress Europe exemplified. It's a three-walled barrier topped with razor wire, and it reminded me very much of the Berlin Wall.
Sorry, we seem to have lost
your
connection.
Countryside is identical. And this barrier is the target for a lot of migrants who try to reach Europe by climbing the Ceuta wall. So it's the scene of mass assaults, which usually involve a lot of police, a lot of migrants, the Guardia Civil on one side, the Moroccan police force on the other, and it's always bloody and unpleasant, and sometimes migrants get over, sometimes they don't. It's a flashpoint. It's a flashpoint in migration between, you know, one of the big issues of our age is going to be migration from the south to the north. And the Ceuta wall, like the wall at Melilla, which also has a perimeter fence paid for by the EU, is a flashpoint for those tensions, because if you get over the other side, you can claim asylum, and some people succeed. And I talked to migrants who were on their third or fourth attempts, all bearing hideous scars from their previous attempts. So that was, sorry, I just wanted to mention Ceuta because although it's not in Tangier, it's part of the landscape of that part of the Moroccan coast. In Tangier itself, there are locations that anybody familiar with Tangier will know well. There was, for example, the Teatro Cervantes, which is currently being renovated. This is a beautiful fin de siècle, 1912, I think, building where famous opera stars like Enrico Caruso sang, sadly fallen into disrepair, but it's bang in the, well, it's just on the edge of the Medina, where the Medina meets the New Town. I've always been fascinated by that place. I walk past it, I have walked past it a lot, poked my head through the, you know, the fence and seen the crumbling statuary. And so I've got a character who basically looks after the place. Another area of Tangier that I find interesting is Marshan. Marshan is very interesting, partly because it's beautiful. It's got the best views of the strait. It's got the most beautiful villas. And it's also the site of two key locations for me. One is the Phoenician tombs, which are mysterious and otherworldly and have, again, a stunning view across the strait. And it's also the location of, yeah, sorry, we might see a photograph shortly. There's a couple of pictures I took from the Phoenician tombs. Well, anyway, and just along from there is the Marshan Cemetery, which is, it sort of borders the topmost part of Marshan, where the King's Summer Palace is. And I thought that was an interesting location for a scene or two, because you've got this very modern cemetery, which is very hard to get into because it's so crowded. There we are. I think it's got some wild sage growing in that picture. beautiful cemetery, looks in the other direction across the Strait of Gibraltar. It's a modern equivalent of the Phoenician tombs, and there are a few migrants are buried there as well. Near there is another iconic Tangier location, which is the Cafe Hafa, which you mentioned, Richard, in your book, like many of my locations. I didn't really want to get into the whole world of the beats, and you know, that's not relevant to my story, but of course that had a pivotal role to play in the time of Ginsberg and Kerouac and Burroughs and all those people. And then finally, this place, the epicenter for me of Tangier, which is the Petit Soko, and in particular, a hotel which stands on the corner, which is the Pension Fuentes, which is, I found a fascinating building, a beautiful building. It was a very high-class hotel in the 30s and 40s. It fell into some disrepair, and it's now a fairly cheap place, but it's right in the center of life in Tangier, and from there you can see everything that's going on. I'm sure it has many interesting stories to tell. That's the cafe on the first floor that you can see. It's the Continental in the foreground, and then the Munira, I think it's called, on the bottom of that building, and then the first floor is the Fuentes Cafe. And I thought it's a great place to spy on people. If you sit on that cafe terrace, or indeed in one of the rooms you can see above it, the 3 bedrooms, you've got a bird's eye view of what goes on in the Petit Soko, which again, in a lot of fiction, has appeared as a place for various nefarious activities. And I thought, well, I might as well, you know, pay a little bit of a homage to that by having some kind of nefarious activity taking place in the Petit Soko as well, because I don't know, why not?
No, it's lovely to see it. If we can keep the photo up for a minute. Oh, sorry, Yulia, can we go back to that one? I've just got my own anecdote about this place. So one of our members wrote a book about the postal service of Tangier, David Stotter, and so he's written a beautiful book about the postal service, and he said there was because Tangier was this international zone, he said that there was something like 6 different post offices. So, you know, you could go and get a Spanish stamp or a German stamp or whatever. And he said that the Petit Soko would echo to the sound of clerks stamping envelopes. And it does look like a spy place, and it looks like the Hotel Fuentes has been sort of repainted. It looks in quite good nick at the moment. Did you get inside it?
I did, and it has been repainted, but it's still 3 or 4 beds to a room. It's still, it's 120 dirhams a night. It's
it looks great. And then, so something weird happened to me was that where that person is sitting on the balcony, so that, you know, people are sitting having nus or whatever, as your main character seems to always do. And then I was sitting down on the ground in the Tingis, near where these people were sitting, another cafe, talking to my friend, because I've been promoting my book at the American Legation. And anyway, on Instagram, for some reason, someone's photo came up on Instagram of a Moroccan guy, and he was sitting on that balcony. And I zoomed in on the picture, and there's a picture, and in the background, you can see me and my friend having a coffee in the Cafe Tingis. And I thought, what are the chances of that happening? So I then friended the guy on Instagram, and you know, we sort of swapped messages, but it was just a weird seeing myself in the background of someone else's social media feed. But there you go. That's a very sort of Tangier thing. That I'm a bit like you. I find that Morocco always throws up unexpected things. So the other thing I thought about is that your book, as I said, is quite cinematic. Have you ever thought about turning the books into film or TV series or something? Is that something that you thought about? Because it reads a bit like a film script.
Well, chance would be a fine thing. Yes, listen, if anybody's listening who's a film producer, I've got a pen in my hand, I'm ready to sign.
Well, we did have briefly, I don't know if we've still got Saida. Are you there, Saida? I'm not sure if she's still with us, but Saida Ruas has written a detective novel based in Marrakesh called Assembly of the Dead, and she's been approached by some American TV series people, so she's hoping to get it turned into like a Netflix mini-series, but I don't think she's on our call at the moment. But anyway,
I've read that book, and indeed it's a very cinematic book too.
You weren't deliberately setting out to get a film commission then. It was you wanted to write a book. And
my background is writing TV commercials, and I tend to think in images rather than words. That's possibly why I find writing a struggle sometimes. I'm not very good on interiority. I am quite good at painting pictures, and I mean, in Morocco, you have a head start because it is a cinematic country. I mean, I've lost count of the number of my friends who talk about being being in a film set. So, yeah, I mean, I did play the images and the scenes in my head to see if they worked as a visual idea much more than I read aloud, as you're supposed to do with a book, to see if the words sounded right, because I was always keen to think of how it would play if it was a scene, like my scene at the Ceuta wall. I absolutely played every moment of that in my head. And I just thought that is the sort of scene I would like to see in a film. So that's kind of you to say. And yes, I mean, if it ever came to that, I would be thrilled. But partly also because I would like, if I could invent in some very small way, as I'm sure you feel with your books, Richard, help aid a better understanding of Morocco and appreciation of Morocco, then that's, for me, you know, my job is done, because I want to overcome lazy cliches and present the country in its best light. Yeah, so if a film was made of Saida's book or my book, I'd be absolutely delighted. With the premise that, of course, it was done in a respectful way and one that, you know, didn't make the usual sort of tropes of, you know, Moroccan people or ways of life.
And do you know how it's got? Have you had any feedback from people in Morocco about the books?
Only from people like ourselves who live there. So English-speaking expatriates who are very critical and good readers for that reason, because they know the cities better than I do. And on the whole, they've been quite favourable. But you know what it's like if you're a writer. Nobody's really going to say, Richard, I read your book, and you know what? I don't know. They're never going to say it. They're always going to say, Richard, that was fantastic.
Maybe they're thinking it, yeah. But your details were, as far as I could see, I couldn't find any flaws in the, you know, that's why it seemed very well researched. All the touches were very vivid. But it's just, I know it's fiction, but in the book, there's sort of collusion between the authorities and the criminals. And I wondered if, you know, anyone in Morocco had said, oh, you know, you're painting a bad picture of Morocco. I know it's not, I know it's fiction. So, but were you worried at all about offending anyone?
Yes, I am. I was, and I am. And I've always wanted not to suggest anything that's, I mean, obviously you take liberties if you write fiction, and you take liberties especially with crime. And my main protagonists, because there are two, one is a female and one is a man, the adopted sister of the male detective, I wanted to be not suggest that the Moroccan police were corrupt or violent. Having said that, however, there are cases of, you know, as in any society, of that kind of behavior. I don't particularly go into it, but I tried, the central collusion between the authorities and, yeah, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but the baddie.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm keen to portray the real instigators of that collusion as Europeans. I want to deflect some of the moral responsibility, and I was slightly basing my account on a real life case that happened in, I think it was around 2008, where a very famous drug smuggler was apprehended in Tangier, and along with him, I think 30 members of the security forces were indicted basically for collusion. And it was a cause célèbre in Morocco. And one of the high-ranking, I think he was the chief of police in Tangier, but he was certainly the man in charge of security at the Royal Palace. And he lost his job, and many of them still in Kenitra. You know, it's tricky, this, because, you know, I mean, there were times writing the book, I thought, what am I doing? Because I might end up being exiled from Morocco. And I know people that's happened to, and you know, that would be just awful for lots of reasons, but mainly because I don't want to offend Morocco or Moroccans. Equally, I want to tell a great story, and you know, nobody would care if you suggested collusion between the British government and, say, traffickers, because that's what happens. It's fiction. In Morocco, you have to be more sensitive. So if people read the book, they will see that I've tried to distance any suggestion that there is a person or a cadre within the Moroccan police that's in any way corrupt. But I do clearly suggest there are individuals who were corrupt, and I regret any offence that may cause, but equally, you know, hey, it's fiction, and I'll take the consequences. I hope, yeah, they're not too severe. But I am aware of that.
I hope you don't end up in prison in Kenitra. You'll have to send us a postcard if you do. Have you got any advice for would-be writers? Because lots of people, I'm sure, would love to write, and I just wonder what you would say to them.
Well, I'd probably say what you would say, Richard. I mean, you started as a journalist and you wrote that great book about the storytellers of Marrakesh. The thing is just to write. And my advice would be, use any means at your disposal that make sure you write, or that facilitate your writing, or that incentivize you to write. In my case, for 8 years, I wrote the Marrakesh book. I had no incentive whatsoever, but I joined a writing group, so I had to produce a chapter every month. I actually hired somebody to crack the whip, an editor I paid, to make me produce, literally to say, James, where's the next chapter? And then to have a Skype call and discuss it.
Yeah.
And thirdly, there's no question that having an agent or a publisher breathing down your neck makes you produce the goods. And it's all about producing the goods, because I think everybody's got a story within them. It's just how do you get the thing out? And as I say, you know, I spent many years getting up at 6 or 5:30 in the morning because I found I could work then free of distraction. But I was always looking for a way to just get me to sit still and not say to myself, this is rubbish, what am I even thinking of? Pack it in, go back to day job, because that voice will always be going in your head. And so you've got to keep producing and resist every temptation to give up. That's all I'd say. Find whatever it takes, writing group, hire somebody, show it to your peers. I'm a big believer in not protecting and guarding your precious work, but exposing it to the harsh light of day, because actually that will prompt you to keep writing, I think. Whereas if you keep it covered up and you're reluctant to show it, it sort of feeds the self-critical side of ourselves that feels, who am I to publish a book or write a book? And I wish the best of luck to anybody who tries any kind of creative endeavor, writing of fiction, poetry, non-fiction. It's rewarding, and it's seriously taxing, and I think you might agree with me about that.
So how do people get hold of this book? And also just tell us very briefly about what the next one will be.
Okay, so online, I've got an Instagram account and a Facebook page called Moroccan Murder Mysteries. You can follow the link there. It'll take you to bookshop.org, which is a very laudable setup where all the proceeds go to independent bookshops in the UK. It's also available in German, different, obviously, means of getting hold of that, but essentially online you'll find it, and in some bookshops. The next book, briefly, is set in Fez. Because of lockdown, I've not been able to go to Fez. And Fez is, wow, I mean, that's so right for storytelling. And again, I feel humbled by the prospect, because it's such a magical, mysterious city, and I don't want to fall into easy cliches about it and its medieval winding alleyways. But I have got a story in my head when it's half written, and I'm waiting, like I'm sure many people on this Zoom call, anxiously to go back to Morocco. I mean, I'm behind me, you probably can't see it, but this room is not really a study. It's probably an illusion. You think I spend all my time writing here. I don't. I use it to store the things I've got to take to Morocco, to put in my house in Lydia, or to take to people in Morocco. And I can't wait. Currently, I'm booked on a flight at the end of August, but as we know, these are uncertain times, and my flight and my family's flight has been cancelled 7 times already to Marrakesh, and I fully expect it to be cancelled again. So until I can get to Fez and spend 2 or 3 months living there with a family, which I've already arranged but not been able to do, then no further progress will be made. So it gives me a great excuse not to do any writing.
So it was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. So I'd like to throw it open to the rest of us for questions. So please feel free either to, Yuli, if you want to unmute us, so either physically wave or use that icon or the message thing, but feel free to ask another question or two. Ali's got 2 hands up. Go ahead.
Right, I was wondering actually about the moment that triggered your inspiration to write the book. What was it, and when was it? And also the same thing applies for the book that actually you are intending to write as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Okay, so I was sitting in the Petit Soccer and I saw a migrant walking through. You sit in that square, like Richard, I've sat at the Tingis, I've sat at the Continental, I've sat in every cafe, in every restaurant, I've sat in the juice bar, I've sat in the first floor restaurant where they do really good rotisserie chicken. I love watching people in Morocco, well, everywhere, but particularly in Morocco, and especially in the Petit Soccer, because it's a non-stop cavalcade, somewhat paralleled by the same one outside the Café de Paris, but there's nothing to beat sitting in the Petit Soccer all hours. And I saw a migrant, and the way he carried himself, which was, not proudly, but slightly furtively, I just wondered what story he had to tell, and I began to look into it a bit. And I discovered a wealth of information and things that I never knew about. I mean, for one place that's iconic in Tangier that I haven't mentioned is the Church of St. Andrew. There is a slide of it. I knew this church very well, and I've often been and looked at the graves and attended services, and I find it fascinating. The whole place is beautiful, but I didn't realize that it's also the place of worship for a lot of migrants prior to setting off across the strait in usually very, very inadequate type of vessels, or an assault on Ceuta, the wall at Ceuta. They pray at St. Andrew, and if you attend a service there, you will see a very small number of English people who are left from the English population, but a huge number of people from Nigeria, Senegal, Guinea. Yeah, if you go on a couple of slides, there's also a picture of the congregation. And that, yeah, that was a revelation to me. And I talked to the caretaker there, Mustafa. I knew his father as well. And, you know, just threads started to emerge about the life of migrants. And what interested me also was how are they treated by Moroccans? Are they despised? Are they looked down upon? Are they welcomed? Are they accepted? You know, there's a lot of shades of, well, I mean, really, it runs the gamut of all types of reception they get in Tangier. And that interested me enormously. Because for these people, this is the last stage of their long journey, often taking a year or more, through the most arduous conditions imaginable. And they may be fleeing all sorts of conditions that we can only, well, barely imagine. And they arrive in Tangier, and then they're looked upon or ignored with bemusement by the locals. And yeah, I wonder what that felt like. What does it feel like to be a Moroccan, a Tanjawi? What do they feel about migrants? And again, it seems it's very multifaceted, very interesting. I mean, it's a subject you had a speaker on, actually, Richard, in winter, who explored many of these themes in his research, because you've got this collision of cultures, and to a lot of, he made a point which I thought was extremely pertinent, which is that seeing all these migrants in Tangier makes Moroccans remember that they're part of Africa, and they don't like to be reminded of that. They look, you know, as Hassan said, you know, it's a tree with its branches in Europe and its roots in Africa, Morocco. They look to Europe, and they don't want to be reminded of the hinterland. And the presence of all these migrants is perhaps a reminder of that, of their Africanness. So I found that very, very interesting. So it was really just seeing the presence of migrants, which I hadn't noticed when I was in Tangier in the 90s and in the 80s, because it is a relatively modern phenomenon, and how they have, you know, they've started to attend the services at St. Andrew's Church to offer up their prayers, you know, and I just thought that's, you know, I mean, what must be going through their minds when they sit in that congregation the next day or that night? They may be about to sail, maybe never see their loved ones again. You know, it's very moving in a way. Yeah.
And what's actually inspired you to write about Fez?
So my angle on Fez was, it's another contentious issue in Morocco, which again, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And that's the issue of adoption, which isn't strictly recognized in Islam. I have many friends who've adopted Moroccan children, and you know, they have to embrace Islam, they have to bring the child up in the Islamic faith. And so one of my protagonists is a child who is, inverted commas, adopted, because I don't use that word. And I wanted to explore that a bit further by imagining an orphanage in Fez. And there was indeed such an orphanage set up by the Jewish population of Fez, located outside some distance. I don't know if it was at Sefru, but it was it's a good distance from the city centre, and that's one of the places I intend to visit. And I was just interested again in those themes of identity and of belonging, and being not an outcast, but being left by your parents. What that does to your sense of self? And in Morocco, where there's another layer to that. Because you're essentially the ward of the person that adopts you, you retain your family name. So the protagonist in that book, or one of them, is a character that is adopted by Westerners and goes to America and is a school child there during 9/11. So goes through a huge and awful time there because he has a very Islamic name, which he has to keep. And then returns to Fez 15 years later. That was the starting point. And I thought that was a way in, if you like, to the Fassi society is fascinating, and I haven't got time to go on about it, but there'll be many people on this call who know far more about it than I do. But again, it's composed of many different strata, including several elites who may or may not be descended from Andalusian migrants or have links with the palace because they're eminent politicians or businessmen. They're very eminent families in Fez, and I was interested in that. So I just thought using an orphanage as a way into exploring the history and the, again, many iconic landmarks of Fez might be, it would be a key, if you like, to unlock that door without, hopefully, and you would be the judges, being, caught in peddling some kind of, tourist yarn, because, Fez is obviously a medieval warren of streets that lead nowhere. But what goes on behind those doors of those streets that lead nowhere is what I'm interested in, So yeah, I hope I succeed. We'll see.
I'm sure you will. Who else would like to ask a question to James?
I think Richard Kirker.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard. You're muted at the moment. Yuliu, can you unmute everyone?
Yes, I've unmuted. Thank you. Hello, James. Great to hear you talk. I will make an admission straight away. I've not read your book, but I'm fascinated by anybody who's chosen to live in Walidia, a great place. And you might be familiar with the Australia 2, the lovely little restaurant next to the oysterage. And not much further away, the redoubtable, inflammatory, and highly gifted British artist, Bill West. How have you managed not to write about Bill? Or would you think it'd be more than your life was worth to do so?
Well, thank you, Richard. Interestingly, Bill West was almost the first character I met after the time I arrived in Walidia. I went back again a week later with my wife, and I noticed a British number plate in town, and I was fascinated. So I went to the house where it was parked, and that's how I met Bill West. He was then renting a house on the lagoon. And yes, our lives have intersected a great deal in the time I've lived in Walidia, and I have to say, I think he's an incredible and brilliant artist, and I wish I had one of his paintings. And I spent many evenings at his studio, which you perhaps have visited too.
Yes, I have.
But of course, there's a dark... Sorry?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yes, but there was a dark side, of course, to Bill. I mean, for people who don't know, he was a hard-drinking, hard-living artist who loved Morocco, but also managed to end up in prison and
numerous
threatened
times
with expulsion. Yeah, numerous times. I mean, I was talking earlier about, not wishing to end up myself as a victim of that disfavor. Well, he certainly did. And yet, because of his charm, he always managed to inveigle his way back in. And indeed, towards the end of his career, his pictures were collected by the royal family. He had an in into Casablanca high society, I don't know what's happened to Bill. I've heard rumours he may be dead. He may have gone back to England. I haven't seen him for a few years. So, you know, he wasn't in the best of health when I last saw him. No. But he was a very larger-than-life character, and somebody certainly should write about him.
They certainly should, because those altercations in front of the chief of police in the Australia Cafe, when he would insult the chief of police in the most inflammatory way possible. If he wasn't aware what his fate was going to be very shortly, then he must have been totally absorbed and entwined with those demons that you made reference to. Well, but I mean, a character, you could not, in my experience, really create he would someone in real life who had those characteristics. If you've not met somebody like Bill, where it's all came to.
Indeed, Bill West, his fate was to be a fictional character, really. Yes. He's a fictional character, and I remember he used to, because he was banned from every restaurant that sold alcohol in Walidia, he used to get a boat from his studio, which was halfway down the lagoon, and he'd sail down late at night, and then he'd slink into the Hippocampe or the Araignée Gourmande, and he would talk to one of the staff who he was still friendly with, because if the proprietors ever found him, they would instantly call the police. And he was in that prison cell in Walidia. He's probably, you know, the main occupant of it, frankly. But he had charm, and
if not in one of the many brothels that surround the town and on the outskirts of Moroccan cities, and sometimes right in their centre. The police could always be pretty certain where to find him if they needed, but if he wasn't in his studio.
How did you meet him, Richard, if I may ask?
I'm travelling around. I just loved the Austria, and I couldn't resist feeling that this was a man who needed to be noted. And you know, as you're absolutely correct, some of his works were commissioned by the major businesses of Morocco to embellish their company headquarters. And they were status symbols, and they remain so. His art, for those who like that style, is second to none. Not much heralded in Britain, the country of his birth, as an artist, far more so in Morocco, which, as many will already know, has a thriving artistic and creative community. So to get noticed in that context as an outsider, and he didn't really cultivate friends. He didn't want to make friends with the British. I mean, other people were often more an inconvenience and an irritant. But how he managed to get as well known and to get paid for his artwork in Morocco as an outsider is in itself a very interesting story.
Great. And Helen, did you have a question?
Not a question as such. Hi, James. I wanted to say to you that I haven't read the second book yet. I'm saving that, hopefully, for a boat trip that I hopefully will be taking in September to Morocco. But The Death in the Medina absolutely blew me away because it's set in an area that I know very well in Marrakesh. I've got great friends that live around the police headquarters, and reading the book was so incredible that you described it, and I felt like I was there. And I read it at the start of lockdown when I couldn't go to Marrakesh, and I'm in constant contact with my friends there. And it was like having my own little journey. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that, because it was just incredible that I could read about the place that I know so well and really feel that I was actually there.
Oh, thank you, Helen. I appreciate your kind words. Thank you for that. Yes, you're talking about the police station in the Rue Human Fatouaki, or it's now called something completely different. Anyway, Malak.
I don't know the name of the road, but it's sort of on the edge of the Casbah, near the big station. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I only gained admittance to there. I mean, Ali was asking me originally about inspiration. The inspiration for that book, apart from Ramadan, was the hand carts in Marrakesh. In every Moroccan city, you see a hand cart. long may they continue. I fear the day when they're overtaken by scooters or other forms of transport. I've always thought they're the perfect size for a body to be curled up. And that was, I was thinking that when I was crossing that road from a picture framer, because on the other side of that road there's some very good picture framers.
There are.
Among the mattress sellers. The mattress sellers, and then there were the picture framers. And I was just thinking that as I crossed the road, and I thought, how am I going to get into that police station? You know, there's no way they're going to let me in if I say, I'm writing a book about a policeman in Morocco. Can I have a look round? Absolutely no way. So I concocted a story that I didn't even want to say I'd been the victim of a theft, because I thought that in a tiny way adds to the perception of foreigners that Morocco is a place where people get mugged. So I said, I've lost my camera. I went in, I said, I want to report a loss. And I spent a good 2 hours in that police station, once again, looking around like a child in a toy shop, you know, absorbing detail. And yeah, I sometimes think I should go back there and present them with a copy of the book, because I invented a life for those guys and women that probably they have no idea about, you know. But it's a very interesting part of the Medina, that bit that borders the Casbah and the Jamaat. Yes, that's a great area of Marrakesh.
Yeah, my friends live right in the street, right behind where the picture framers and the mattress sellers are. There's almost opposite the police station. Next time you go, you can have a look. There's a little tiny archway that goes down and to the street behind, and they live right behind there.
The pedestrian street? Or the one
Yeah.
next to that? Yeah.
No, it's a little bit further on. There's a big arch that goes through where there's lots of little market stalls, and eventually comes round at the bottom of the main road, the street that goes down to Juma Al Fanar. But just a little bit further, if you were standing with the police station behind you, if you looked to your right, there's a much smaller little archway that goes down, and there's quite a posh little interior shop down there. And then you get into this little street, and there's a very old mosque at the end with kind of a Jewish symbol on the doors, and my friends live there. And yeah, so just reading the book, it was just incredible. And I actually sent my dad a copy in the UK of your book as well, and you have the little map in the front, and I marked on, and it's like, Mohammed lives here and such lives here, so that he could read it and try and imagine, because I just thought that you captured it so well. So yeah, it was just to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Tangier. I felt that I was sitting in the Petit Socco or the Cafe Haffa or the Continental or whatever. And John, you've got Yulia, can you unmute John Rowe?
So I think I'm unmuted. I want to thank you, and for that subject matter as well, and that picture of Soweto and the wall, and how it is reflected in Calais, with and I mean, I'll read the book only for the, well, I want to read the book anyway after tonight, but that the journey through Africa of the migrants, because I met Sudanese migrants in the park in Brussels, where they gather, because I was did some stuff for Care for Calais, but it's just, but everything you describe sort of just is, it's not just Fortress Europe, but it's the whole, you know, that wall, that razor wire is reflected all round. It's it was very powerful.
Great. Anyone else? Any more questions? In that case, I think Mike, are you still there, Mike?
I think Richard.
Sorry, Richard, carry on.
Just for James's sake and anybody else who may be interested, I've just done a check on whether Bill West is alive, because some doubt was raised about whether he was, and the evidence I've gathered is that he is still alive, but I wouldn't go to into a court of law and swear that that's the truth.
Okay. This is what Lucy's saying as well. Apparently he's still alive in Somerset. Moore Lynch, is that right, Lucy?
Yeah, I haven't seen him, but Yeah, just on an art gallery website, it suggested that he was still selling his paintings on his own behalf. So I think he's still alive.
Right.
Good.
Brilliant.
Okay, so Mike, I'll hand it back over to you. But once again, a big thank you to James for a fascinating talk and a glimpse of Tangier and Marrakesh and how you wrote these wonderful books. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, James, for transporting us to Morocco, and for adding cargo journeys to, or certainly to my bucket list anyway. I should explain that there's a thunderstorm breaking here, so I'm slightly worried that I may lose internet connection, but I'm going to read one or two parish notices if I may. I'd like to welcome a new corporate member in Journey Beyond Travel, our good friend Lucas Peters. We've got some fantastic upcoming events in the autumn, in-person events, I'm delighted to say. We've got a social at Sketch Restaurant off Oxford Street on the 1st of September. We've got a tea at the House of Lords on the 30th of September, and that will be a fantastic event. I know they're always very enjoyable. Then we have our annual gala dinner, which is celebrating 300 years of UK-Morocco friendship on the 2nd of November, and we'll also be welcoming a new Moroccan ambassador to London. So that will be a fantastic event. We do have some events following at the National Liberal Club. I mentioned that with Trevor and the audience, our AGM, and we have a Barnaby, I think, Richard.
Yeah, Barnaby Rogerson talking about a book that's been sort of revived and translated.
Fantastic. So we've got a really rich program of in-person events throughout the autumn. Richard mentioned the book festival in Marrakesh, which is the 26th to the 28th of November. And those of us who are organising our diaries and looking forward to some travel should certainly bear that in mind. It's a joint event between the British Business Association and the BMS. There's a gala dinner on the Saturday evening, which is benefiting that wonderful charity Education for All. And I think we're all going to make our best efforts to make the best of that. So yeah, excuse the parish notices. There's a lot there. I know that we have a lot of members watching on Facebook and on the website, and particularly in the context of Eid, there'll be a lot watching on catch up. So I'd just like to conclude really by thanking James again for a fascinating speech, thanking those of you who are here in person, and to wish you all the compliments of the season and a happy Eid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.